Are we ready? Are you ready?
So you're like that.
So welcome at last to That DV Show.
Yes.
Well done for those of you who stuck with us. Sorry about the technical glitches we had at the beginning there, but we've resolved those now and hopefully we'll have the show uninterrupted. So look, we're here live in Sydney at Work Club at the first episode of That DV Show. My name's Paul Scott and I'm here with Digital Village founders Luke Fabish and Jason Hardy to explore a wide range of topics in the tech sector that we think are going to be interesting for our audience. We've got a slightly truncated show this time around. We're only going to be tackling probably 3 topics this time. So the show might not run for the full hour, but we'd be very interested in your feedback and very interested in any comments you've got around what we're discussing. So you can keep in contact with us during this program by either using the hashtag on Twitter, ThatDVShow, or using any of our social channels or the chat channel in the live stream window on our website. So what kinds of topics are we going to be covering, guys? Well, we've got 3 topics we want to cover today. First of all, what is the value of management consultants? Secondly, we want to talk about this epic battle that's going on between Google, Facebook, the publishers and the regulators as it relates to news media. And then finally, we're going to talk about this strange phenomena of Sydney-siders moving to the bush,
Indeed.
which we've noticed is becoming a bit of a trend. So let's start, guys, with what is the value of management consultants? You guys were out on the streets of Sydney yesterday. Tell us what happened.
Well, yeah.
It's a pretty broad question.
It is.
It was so we went out to the streets like earlier this week, didn't we, Luke? And we set up a little stand in the middle of the street that was displaying a sign that was probably slightly controversial, especially if it's just where it was situated in between a couple of big firms, well-known firms. Can everyone see that the picture? Yeah. Okay. So we went out and we got some pretty interesting looks, didn't we, Luke? I mean, when no one actually ended up.
Yeah, but that's all.
Yeah.
That's right.
So no one actually came and had a conversation with us, which was a bit of a shame. A few people saying good luck and a few kind of quirky smiles and awkward looks, but it was, I think, it was going to be interesting to hear people's different perspective because ultimately that's. This is only our perspective anyway, and so the truth is that they do kind of have their place, don't you?
Yeah, I think the whole idea of that was to, I guess, pose a bit of a provocative question in order to get a conversation going, and we couldn't get a conversation going, unfortunately. Nobody really wanted to have a go, which is a shame. I think it's a fair question.
But guys, this whole topic came up when Luke, you and I saw a paper that was published that was describing this new thing in management consultant terms called demand inflation.
Yes.
So this was an academic paper that was published at the back end of last year in
December.
Europe, in December. And in this paper, these academics were describing the impact of management consultants in the public sector.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess they were looking at like 3 things, right? Which is, will engaging a management consultancy increase or make it more likely that you would engage that consultancy further down the track? That's their demand inflation. Secondly, does it result in this case, because it was the private sector, would it result in techniques and practices from the private sector being transplanted into the public sector? And finally, it was, if it resulted in an increase in efficiency or a reduction in efficiency. And they found more or less yes on all 3 questions, that when a consultancy is engaged or had been engaged with this was based around the NHS in the UK, it made it way more likely that they're going to keep on using that consultancy in the future. And there's probably a few reasons for that, right? We've all spoken before about how it's often an easy choice to make. because if we go out and hire one of the big names, then we're probably not so likely to get into trouble for that. And we can hire them based on reputation, and of course also those organisations have an interest in keeping the business going and creating more opportunities in an organisation as they work. So you have a perspective on that, Paul.
So there have been a number of high-profile incidents where this has happened. So in the UK, with the National Health Service patient record system, a 5-year project, a $10 billion price tag to it, a whole series of reasons why it failed. But principally, it's a case of, this was a very, very large and complex project. There's no question of that. And the evidence that's reported in the paper that we read was that they really rushed the procurement process. It was very much a top-down project, and they didn't really focus on the scope and the deliverables of what these consultants were being asked to do.
No.
And consequently, they didn't get it right.
No,
and it cost the UK government and taxpayer a massive amount of money.
Yeah, it was almost a matter of hire first and then find out what we need to do.
Yeah.
Right. So everybody went into it kind of blind. It was just the thinking was, we better go out and hire one of these big names, and we'll just work out what to do as we go.
Yes, but I mean, putting your agile development hat on from a tech perspective, Luke, obviously that's the last way that you'd want to tackle a project,
I think
isn't
so. I think through relentless, broad experience, I think the whole industry has discovered that trying to bite off an enormously large project, chew it all up at once and eat it all at once, it doesn't work. Better to take small parts of it, see what we can get done, get a small thing working, and then build on that over time, so that we can see value being delivered over time and then building on value.
Yes.
So that,
And are there any examples here in Australia that you can think of that exhibit the same kind of characteristics?
Oh, gee, we were talking about the COVID Safe app, weren't we?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Which was, again, one big solution for everybody. Let's rush it to market, unveil it with enormous fanfare, and then see what happens. Which was
it didn't quite have the impact that people expected. I mean, to be fair to those developers, I mean, clearly, there was a bit of a panic on to get something out there.
Tough brief.
It was a tough brief.
Yes.
But then you look and see what New South Wales government have done by putting their COVID registration app within the service app, and it's been a huge success, and really the cornerstone of how they've been able to execute contact tracing so effectively has been actually having that app and the QR codes in every premises that you go into in Sydney. Or anywhere in New South Wales.
I think what's really interesting is that is almost a classic kind of MVP-ish approach, because all of those outlets were doing that anyway, one way or another. You go in, you write something down, or you register on something that they'd cooked up themselves, like a Google form or something, and they had shown that worked. And then this other approach was taken to build on that and to take that existing working process and kind of systemize it, and so that it could be scaled across the whole state.
So in defence of management consultants, I have to declare an interest here, because I've been a management consultant for 25 years, and I actually think that we get a bit of a hard rap sometimes. To be honest, I think the best way for organisations to use management consultants is on the strategic front. So if you're being asked to develop a strategy, if you can bring in an external advisor who has got experience in that industry, who really understands it from the ground up, they can add huge value in creating the strategy. Where it becomes difficult is where it moves from strategy to implementation, or execution, as it's often called.
Indeed.
Because not all of these consulting firms have got the expertise to execute the strategy that they develop. So I think the people who are buying these services are just as complicit here as the consultants themselves, because if they don't understand the difference between strategy and execution and the skill set and the competencies required, then bad things might happen.
Yeah, I still think that, there's still, if you're going to be coming up with a solution, there's a level of accountability that needs to be there for it to be a valid solution. So it's okay to come in and have a perspective, an external perspective, which is super valuable, and to have highly specialised people to be able to do that. But when there's a separation to the deliverable or the outcome to the solution, or if you're coming up with it, whoever's coming up with it, there's it has the potential to create the wrong solution, because the kind of motivation of that solution can be influenced by internal company metrics, as opposed to what is actually going to achieve the best outcome for the customer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's just, I guess the key is aligning the solution with the right outcome for the customer.
But do you think organisations put enough emphasis on trying to learn from these consultants and start embedding the skills in their own
I
organisation?
would love to see that, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something that probably doesn't happen enough,
It
because,
doesn't.
like that article you guys were talking about before kind of indicated, there becomes an increased dependency on external consulting firms, because the more they use them, the more they lack of that kind of knowledge and insight
So
internally.
they get a bit lazy.
Well, the old saying about the consultants, somebody looks at your watch to tell the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's like people also forget how to tell the time, right? And then eventually the consultant ends up wearing your watch as well, because you've just given it all to
So
them.
he's then stolen your watch, as well as telling you the time. Okay, I get you.
And then telling you what time it is. There was an interesting example of that in an article I read. It was an American scenario where a big firm that everyone knows was engaged by the Trump administration for an immigration project, and they'd embedded themselves so much into the ecosystem that they ended up actually writing the contracts to engage themselves in that piece of work for the next 3 years or something like that, and big projects. So an
enviable arrangement.
yeah. So I guess one of my issues with that model is that it can be kind of self-serving. So that's
So what you're referring to is a lack of governance and control, really. So there's no kind of oversight, perhaps, to what they're being asked to do. And by the way, I don't think it's just with management consultants.
Yeah,
I think
that's
this is
true.
in the IT sector, because I've seen systems integrators doing exactly the same thing that you've just described, which is to be in a position where they can literally write their own PO.
Well, everybody would like to be able to write their own checks, wouldn't they? For the work.
Because it's one of those things, so if you imagine it from an executive's position, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, okay, we have this very critical problem and we need a solution, and it's something that seems that probably don't have the capacity to deal with right now. So you bring in an expert.
Yeah.
And you rely on a well-known brand to be able to do that. And especially in IT, if it's something that you don't understand, then you become increasingly separated from the problem and the solution, and completely more dependent on it. So it's really driven by fear almost. From an executive position, if you're an executive of a big company and you've got shareholders breathing down your neck, and the board is like, if don't fuck this up or you'll lose your job, and that's essentially what might be going through your head. That's going to really influence your decisions you make about who you engage to do the work.
Of course. Yeah. So it becomes a bit of a safety blanket.
Yeah.
It's the old adage of nobody got sacked for firing IBM.
Exactly. Yeah.
Although IBM, you look at them as a company at the moment, their revenues are actually dropping. So that's a different story. But so I think it's clear that there is value in having management consultants, but it's really more about being conscious of what it is you're asking them to do, not getting them to overreach to a point where you give them such a huge problem to fix that they can't possibly win, because it's just going to become too complex and take too long. And then make sure you're fully engaged at every step of the way, so that you can be accountable for what it is they're actually delivering.
Not outsourcing the responsibility for your own decision making, really.
Correct.
And probably to add to that, what might be the more meaningful way forwards for companies, and rather than going in, doing an analysis, submitting a nice shiny recommendation report with a bunch of numbers that can kind of be extrapolated from anything if you have enough data, is actually helping the customer make their own decisions and having them come up with the solutions and actually supporting them in that, rather than giving it to them on a piece of paper.
Yeah. So how do you feel about having management consultants within organisations? Because a lot of the bigger firms have that model. I mean, the McKinseys and Bains of this world actually go out of their way to kind of seed their senior partners in these large enterprises for a period of time, either on secondment or, genuinely getting employed by them.
Can go either way, right?
It could.
I mean, like, why do they do that?
Well, if you were being unkind, you could say it's a cynical way of keeping them bound to the consultancy.
I'm being a bit dramatic.
But I genuinely think actually they can make a huge difference. I mean, I worked in Europe for a long time with a lot of the large corporates there. And there were many consultants or ex-McKinsey and Bain and Boston consultants who were on the boards of the companies that I worked for. And you could tell just by looking at the LinkedIn profile where they'd been before. And it seemed to be quite a common thing to rotate them in and out of these large enterprises in order to, give a perspective that perhaps the rest of the board didn't have, and to seed ideas and move them forward.
Yeah, I think, again, we acknowledge we've got these awesomely skilled and experienced people who have enormous value to offer to organisations. And getting them on the team is obviously going to be really, really attractive. But there is always going to be that kind of lingering suspicion about, are they clearing the way for more work
kind of
to come
seeding
through
The
the
next
door?
army of consultants to walk in
is
through the front door.
Yeah.
That's right.
I mean,
That's very cynical.
It is.
I mean, I don't think that's true.
Okay, but I mean, a lot of the kind of models and frameworks that they do use, especially the older ones, where it is about kind of new recurring business and kind of building that into the solution. I mean, there is examples of that. Maybe it is a bit of a cynical view, but to your point, I mean, I think it's putting, you're putting consultants into the business or into industry is, I mean, I think that is a terrific thing, and they do attract, amazing talent, because the world is full of these bright people that are going to these amazing universities, and they want to change the world, and they want to, they view these big firms as a way of doing that, because they're solving intricate problems and complex problems, and they get the best training, and they do, and but from people that I've spoken to and things that I've read about it, it seems to rarely be realised. And so their kind of vision or mission or intention of being part of these organisations and doing something meaningful, solving meaningful problems, kind of gets lost, and they end up doing you're kind of getting grinded to their bones to. I mean,
it is a hard slog. It's got to be a daunting sort of view arriving at a consultancy at the bottom of the totem pole, looking up at the partner position, knowing, counting the number of new grads and the number of partners, and going,
And there's a little bit wrong with that, because that whole kind of meritocracy kind of base of view of working your way up the ladder. And the merits are essentially measured by company metrics, which are completely financial. Now, if someone is interested in creating a positive impact in the world, then that's not necessarily measured by financials. So makes it really difficult for someone a very intelligent person who is wanting to do that, to be able to achieve their goal. So they end up actually not actually serving what they were out to do.
No. Okay.
Anyway.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So we think we've given that one a good bash.
Yeah.
Actually,
But and if I don't know, maybe has anyone kind of made comments, or is everyone kind of totally zoned out because we started an hour late?
None at the moment.
Blabbering on.
Well, I know.
I want to move on, guys,
Yeah.
because the next topic we're going to talk about is this news media one. So
Indeed.
a huge amount of press coverage, TV coverage in the last couple of weeks Google and Facebook taking some pretty extreme action to basically either remove news content from their websites, or threatening to remove search in the case of Google. Because of the new legislation that the government's coming up with here in Australia to try and provide some recompense for the publishers of news. So far, Google threatened to pull the plug and then backed away from it.
The Prime Minister said we could all use Bing instead.
Well, and then, of course, the whole world said, I thought Bing had died. What is Bing?
He looks like a Bing kind of guy, doesn't he?
Yeah, so perhaps that demonstrated the Premier's lack of grasp and the technicalities of what's going on in our industry. I don't know. But so yes, that was probably something that Microsoft could not even have dreamed was going to happen, that they would even suggest Bing. That was amazing. But Facebook have taken action. Looked like a bit of a misstep to begin with, because they basically just did this blanket removal of news content and anything that seemed to have news in it, including charity sites, and not-for-profits, and
government
the fireys, and the government
sites, right? Like,
really important
their
sites
own
that
news
were
site
covering social issues.
They took their own blog down.
Actually, Facebook took their own blog down, which is absolutely stunning. Talk about that's the metaphor for shooting oneself in the foot, laid bare. But then they retracted some of it, and they started putting all of the good sites back online, and then in the background negotiated a deal for themselves.
Indeed. Well, I guess there's a lot to look at there, because first of all, the different responses of Google and Facebook, because Google has been here before, right? They in Spain, I think back in 2014, they were in a similar position, and they said, okay, we'll just take news off the site in Spain. And there was a bit of a dip in the Spanish news sites initially, and then it picked back up again. And so everybody just started going straight to the news sites instead of getting their news through a Google feed. And so I guess the lesson that they took from that is, well, it's how we can lose eyeballs. And I assume eventually that Facebook came to the same conclusion, that we are going to lose eyeballs if we just take all the news away. People will go elsewhere to find it.
So I wonder how big the risk is for those media companies.
Of what?
Well, of being, not being displayed on search results.
Married to a channel.
Yeah. I mean, it's again, it's down to customer behaviour. If customers have got a choice and they choose to go down the route of those social media platforms in order to get their news, then it's going to have a big impact. But I think more fundamentally, the advertising side of things was perhaps a factor in both Facebook and Google's minds, because of the huge revenues, $4.5 billion worth of advertising that goes out on those social media channels. Sure, the news component of it is a relatively small piece, but nonetheless, that would have an impact, and they'd obviously be considering that. But more importantly, there's the kind of reputational damage as well.
That's right.
If you make a threat and you don't follow through on it, even if you don't follow through on it, it's going to have an impact. And Ben made a comment on our chat channel here. So Twitter benefited from the News Corp lobbying of the Australian government. Facebook got its way in the end, and the cost of the subsidy to New South Wales is small if it's just Australia. So clearly, the big publishers think they've won some kind of a Pyrrhic victory here, because they're now getting paid. I mean, Guardian are getting $100 million from Google. News are getting 30 million. Seven West are getting 30 million, although it looks like that's just a one-year deal. And I think 9 are getting 30 million as well, but that looks like that might be a 5-year deal. So there are some big sums of money that are being sprayed out to these publishers, which potentially has an impact on the legislation. So the government still hasn't published the full legislation, I don't think.
No, well, the thing is, also, I think one of the big lessons out of this is that Facebook found out that they can get a legislation change.
Yes.
By doing something like taking all the news off their site. They were able to sit down with, I think it was Josh Frydenberg, and have a talk and have some changes made to the
Yeah.
legislation that would be more suitable to them.
Sure, but isn't there a risk that although they've started negotiating offline, if you like, with these publishers, if Facebook and Google don't get what they want from the legislation, they could just as easily just pull the plug again
Absolutely.
and say, sorry, all bets are off.
Yep.
We're not going to do that deal with you because we haven't been able to get what we wanted from the legislation.
Yeah, I mean, what a position to be in if you're a big media outlet and you have invested in that channel as a way to promote your content and your brand and your engagement and direct people to your properties online. Then that's a terrible thing to live with. There's one of the execs of one of the stations, I think it was Channel 9, was describing that takedown as a significant but not fatal blow to the company. And so this is huge, obviously, to them. It's really huge. I mean,
Well, what's the number of people that actually get their news through social media? It's like a very high number, whatever it is.
It's a big proportion, isn't it?
Yeah, I think something like
37%?
Yeah, I think we found 37% of people in Australia use social media as their main news source.
Wow.
So that's a lot of eyeballs for everybody, right?
It is.
There's a lot for the news companies. It's a lot for Facebook.
It's a lot Facebook and Google, really. I mean, especially when their whole business model is based on having if people are actually going to that channel for and kind of seeing it as not a source of truth, but a way of getting information.
Yes.
And then all of the news sites actually all of a sudden are taken off, then the credibility of Facebook goes completely plummets. And what are you left with?
Yeah, I mean, they were in the position of having to defend the quality of information on their site.
Yeah.
And they've had to do that repeatedly.
Yeah.
And one of the lines they have always run is that we have a spectrum of information on our site, and Facebook users are free to choose the information that they consume.
Yeah.
And if we take away all the credible news sources, they're not left with much afterwards.
How much choice do you really have, though, about what you see online? I mean,
it's a good question. Yeah.
I mean, do you actually choose, or does it get served to you based on what you've already seen?
Well, this comes back to the whole data thing. So I mean, to me, the people who lose in this, irrespective of what happens, again, are the end users and the customers.
Yes.
Because, both Google and Facebook are using it as a data play. They collect our information. They collect information on you and me, based on our habits, based on where we're going, based on where our eyeballs are at, and then they monetize it.
Yeah.
And at the core here, it's a case of how long are we going to be products? Because we're no longer customers; we're products. We're providing these big tech companies with data on ourselves, and we get sold and recycled. So and we don't really have much of a say in that. And if you look at, Apple, for example, has seemed to trying to take the moral high ground here by first of all banning third-party cookies from Safari, and then Google came out and said they were going to do the same thing, but not until the end of the year. That Apple are clearly trying to position themselves as being, the guardians of the customer,
of our privacy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you believe that? I'm not sure that. I think Apple are just as complicit in this as the other.
I guess it's just. They're probably correct in the way that they manage the data because the products are different. Like in Apple's case, they actually have products, and so they need our true preferences around what we want, as opposed to.
Oh, it's true. Yeah.
As opposed to what the actual customer of theirs wants, which is a brand wanting to advertise to a particular audience. So the data's kind of flowing the wrong way.
Yep.
But it kind of begs the question: what's a better way to manage your data? I mean, if you, we haven't,
whether who do you trust with it?
Yeah, and how do you actually? What's it? I mean, I don't know. It's kind of open conversation, I suppose. But what might be a better way to manage your data preferences Because I mean, even on those
Have
sites,
have you actually tried doing that?
well,
Because
it's impossible.
It's virtually impossible. I mean, to actually find the places to go to on either Facebook or Google to basically shut down either any of your personal data or information on your location, the way that you're traveling around websites, which apps are going to be sharing your data. It's actually quite a complicated thing to do.
Yeah.
And it was only when Apple released the latest version of their operating system that they were forcing the apps to actually present information to the customer to say, do you mind if we follow you, and do you mind if we share your information with us? But up until then, it was the default.
That's right.
As soon as you opened up the apps, they were basically watching what you were doing, and they were monetizing your behavior.
So I guess a slightly different perspective on it, because so say I'm a consumer, and so for example, and this is, kind of going against a lot of things that I kind of believe in, but it was still like I was kind of interested by the observation. I was Googling something, and I opened up a different browser that I don't usually use, and it was maybe incognito or something, and I searched for something that I was looking for locally, and I kind of already knew that it knew all this stuff about me. It kind of I can't remember what I was looking for. It's probably an embarrassing thing anyway, but. And
you don't need to tell us, mate.
It was really annoying because I had to be really specific about what I was looking for in a very specific location, because it hadn't already learned these things about me.
Yep.
So there's kind of like...
Not getting any help, huh?
Yeah. Like rather than just one word, there's like all of a sudden pops up exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah.
I have to be very specific. So one side is, okay, great, it knows nothing about me.
Yes.
And then the other thing is like, well, now it knows everything about me. But it's...
Make sure you check your Slack messages, people.
Yeah, so we've got a message here from Alicia. So no one reads terms and conditions for tech products or service apps, much like an insurance PDS. And that is the problem.
Yeah,
we're probably presented with the opportunity to do something about this.
Yeah.
But we're lazy.
I think
just
fundamentally
we're just fundamentally lazy. We just think, what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
Well, if there was some monetary value attached to it, if you as a customer were told, if you take for example an app that you pay for, so it's $6.99 if you pay for the app in full and you give us access to your information. If you don't give us access to your information, or it's $10 if you let us use your data.
Yeah.
So then you're giving the customer a choice about whether or not they're actually going to say yes or no, and then you've got the motivation to do the no I don't, yes I do, depending upon what state of mind you're in.
Designed at the moment for you really not to be able to do that, though, because who has the time to read all of the T's and C's when you're installing an app? I got impatient the other day trying to get to the bottom of all of those so that I can click the I accept button.
That's annoying.
Installing an app should, take a minute. I don't have a couple of hours to read all of that and understand it.
Yeah.
Nobody does.
Yes.
Nobody at all. So it's really a process that is designed to get a result, which is for you to blindly click yes, or I don't care.
It's an interesting point. I mean, what if there was an option to kind of democratize data, so they say, and actually monetize your own data. So you have the choice to either like open it up to anybody, or not to anyone, whoever, and they pay for it, access to it, or just not at all. So you kind of own your data. But it does kind of bring in a few. That kind of introduces a fair few problems.
It does, but I'm feeling a blockchain app, which is going to be about individuals' personal data and our ability to then monetize it, and turn it into something that makes money. Can I just point out a couple of comments that have come in here? So Alicia makes a really good point about Australia. I mean, we're a relatively small market, so it was we're an easy test case for Facebook to test things out. And actually we've become this sort of test bed for
that.
What's going to happen if this rolls out across the rest of the world. So, but in the same way, the Australian government is saying, we're introducing this legislation and the whole world is watching. So what will happen in Australia will probably give an indication of what's going to happen elsewhere in the world.
Yeah, no, this is true. Absolutely.
So,
Any other questions?
Sorry?
Any other
We've got a
questions?
few others here.
Yeah.
Well, not questions so much
Or
as
comments.
observations. So Liz has also said Facebook is free, but it's not really at all. They have more personal data mined ever in existence, right? And then Ben's also said, would you pay for a non-harvesting version of Facebook? That's an interesting idea.
Not necessarily Facebook. I've never been a big user.
Yes.
But I think I would definitely consider that for an app, a different kind of app, then sure.
I mean,
see
ultimately,
the
the
value
need
in
is
that.
there, like the social exchange, or like, I mean, the social connection or community
Yeah.
online is a kind of common need now.
Yes.
I assume Rupert from Wonders listening to this will be happy to hear that comment.
Yeah. Yeah, Alyssa's also said that no, most people wouldn't go through this process of paying for the non-harvesting app because of the strength of Facebook and the network effect. Everyone would need to join the new app, the new set app,
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
which is true.
Yeah, I mean, that was, I mean, I think in the early days, the North Star of Facebook was more users.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was it.
I think that's changed. I mean, I
Yeah,
think,
I think so.
that's like the starting point, and then that has become so meaningless because there's no value to the relationship. There's no
No.
understanding of who the hell these people are, and so.
Yeah.
But that was their moat. That was the thing that set them up.
The thing that worked with it was these smaller groups, and I kind of, I guess, plugging Wonder in some way, which is doing that. It's kind of connecting closed networks in a social community, and it's not harvesting the data anyway. But I think that's working really well because
There's appetite for that.
There is, because
Yeah.
people are wanting more meaningful relationships in groups that they are part of, and it is like confined to that, and it's not diluted with randoms.
Sure.
Yeah,
So there's definitely something there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've moved on from the news media thing to data.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we want to point out around the news media thing or data? Are we ready to move on to the next topic?
There was with the data. I mean, I was kind of. It's an interesting topic. I mean, kind of the one last point on that. How are we going for time anyway?
Doing
Yeah,
it
we're
right.
good. We're good.
Okay. Is digital identity, because it's like, well, if we are opening up our data to people and it becomes accessible, even if we're monetizing it, then how do they know if the data is true or that the actual entity is real?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there is a lot around digital identity now. More
Huge.
Yeah.
Massive market.
and not just kind of authorizing things and not, being sure that that is the person who they say they are to activate something or whatever. But I mean, there is a thing in a lot of kind of like third world countries where there is no identity at all of people, like no registered identity.
Yep.
Yeah.
Where there is an application for it in that scenario as well, which is, I mean, it's a fine line between it being like a full matrix or a kind of like that kind of communism, like
absolute observation of all people.
yeah,
all
which is
times.
super scary. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah.
Probably in a couple of years' time.
Yeah, I know.
maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's move on. So, look, our last story is looking at this strange phenomena that's happened as a result of COVID, which is the number of people moving out of Sydney and moving out of Melbourne. There was an article that appeared just over a week ago in one of the national papers that suggested that the research showed that over 7,500 people net had moved out of Sydney in the last 6 or 7 months, and about the same number had moved out of Melbourne. When they're talking about moving to the bush, this was more than 2.5 hours drive from
away.
the city. Why is that happening?
Oh, I think, we've got. I think everybody got used to the idea of remote working and working from home last year, and everybody said, "Well, gee, I think I'd like to have a nicer view out the window. Give me some trees, give me some beach."
Yeah, I mean, a small unit in the city looking at a brick wall becomes pretty uninspiring after 6 months of lockdown.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, I mean, all of a sudden it doesn't make a difference where you are. So why not do it paying less rent, looking at it over a nice field or something, getting some fresh air, getting back in touch with nature in somewhat, and it making no difference to your work.
Well, and also I think just generally less people around.
Yeah.
Maybe feeling a little bit safer during
That's
pandemic.
true. Definitely. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So we've got an appetite for it, clearly, and there was some research that came out from the Business Council of Australia that said about 30% of people would like to work mostly from home.
Oh, right.
So
okay.
that's
And
not
another
necessarily
40-odd% would like to, I think,
have regular days.
have a bit of a flex, sort of like half and half kind of thing. So like total 70-something% of people are like interested in keeping on working from home in one way or another.
Yes. But spoiler alert, this has been going on in the tech sector for about 10 years.
Absolutely.
Are we the only sector that are actually doing this? Because, I mean, you and I, we've all worked in technology companies, and I know that, the idea of having to work in the office every day is a pretty, old-fashioned thing. Most tech companies, and certainly most tech companies here in Australia, have had people working from home for a long time.
Yeah.
Or work anywhere. We used to, in 3 weeks, we used to have this thing called working from. And literally, teams of developers and wranglers would go and find a cafe somewhere and they'd work from there for the day. Yeah. Or actually more often a pub, to be honest. But same thing. Working remotely is definitely one of the things that's come out of positive things, I think, that's come out of the COVID thing. But are there any downsides?
Well, it has introduced a fair amount of challenges for businesses, especially when they're used to working a particular way. And a lot of these businesses would never anticipate introducing anything like that because there's all these fears around are people working, and you need to be able to see that someone has
you need to be able to walk the floor.
And
eyeball them.
Okay, but putting your business analysis hat on here, Luke. I mean, obviously the reason why that is the case is a process failure, isn't it?
Well, I think so.
Managing people remotely is just a case of managing people remotely. How hard can it be?
Well, how could it be? I don't know. Yeah, but I think it does come down to, if you've built your career about managing in a particular way and have done that successfully, now you have to change everything about the way that you do it.
Yep.
Everything from the way you organise work, the way that you deal with people, the way you ask people to get things done, and the way you measure results and outcomes. This is all different now. So that's a big jump, I think, for a lot of people to make.
And what about the financial implications? Because one observation that Alicia's made, which I think is quite valid, is Sydney property prices have not dropped since COVID started. There is higher unemployment. Moving to the bush would seem to give you the opportunity to live in a lower cost environment potentially.
Yes.
So you're not going to be paying the same for property. And if you can work from home the majority of time, then presumably that's going to be less expensive as well. You don't have a commute, you don't have hours out of your day where you're having to get to
attractive.
Very
And
attractive.
there's more value than that. I mean, and it does become a conversation between the employer and the people.
Yeah.
Where there's benefits to the people. If that's a preference, there's value there, and if there's a preference from the organisation, then it's just a matter of finding out a balance. And if it means even a reduced wage of some kind, then I reckon people would still. People do. You're happy to take a cut in pay to work remotely or have a more flexible work life.
It's a horrible expression, work-life balance, but the truth is, if your mental health is in a better condition by working remotely,
that's
and
right.
your physical health is also better, it's beginning to become a much more rounded kind of proposition.
Absolutely, I think that. I think you're right. I think it's a lot. Some people have suffered. This is true. I think some people absolutely do live for that time in the office. A lot of social interaction. and really enjoy that, and locking those people up on their own for months on end is a kind of torture
Yes.
to them.
Yeah.
And so we do kind of have to recognise, I think, that different people are suited to different situations. But I think for people who remote working is suited to, especially if it's done maybe part-time and other
Yes.
times they go into the office, 1 or 2 days a week, then I think having healthier, happier, more enthusiastic, more
Yes.
energized employees would be a wonderful thing for every organisation.
I mean, there were some obvious conditions when people had to start working remotely because of COVID. Most specifically, people being in lockdown, right, which was going to have an impact on some people's mental health. And I was working with companies at the time who had the vast majority of their workforce already working at home.
Yeah.
So they were used to that. What they weren't used to was being locked down at home.
Yeah.
And that did cause some challenges for some people. We had to provide some mental health support to a number of people who were struggling with that.
Yeah.
And it was not easy, particularly if you're alone, if you're a single mum. That can be really, really challenging.
Yes. I think so. But now I think we've got the choice.
Yes.
And I think it would certainly benefit organisations to find a way to accommodate whatever is going to suit their employees best.
Yes.
Assuming they can find a way to make sure, feel comfortable about getting the outcomes that they need from their people.
Yeah.
So
and
Ben
find a way
makes
to
a
do
point
that.
around that as well,
Yeah.
Luke, which is, remote working reduces individual worker efficiency and gossip-infused teamwork. So I think the individual worker efficiency thing is again an indicator of perhaps there are some people who are just not set up to be able to work remotely efficiently.
No.
You've got to be able to spot that and deal with it. But there's also the element of their managers being able to support them to be able to work
That's
efficiently. So
right.
what is it I
Yeah.
need to do to help you
Yeah.
become more efficient
Yeah.
working remotely? If that is a good model generally for our business.
It should be an arrangement you can reach together.
Yes.
This is what you want. This is what we need from you.
Yeah.
And
But how
can
important
we
do you
do
think
that?
the gossip infused bit is? Because I actually really buy into this bit, which is
Sure.
without having those kind of impromptu gatherings around the water cooler, or let's
Yeah.
go for a coffee and a chat, or a quick beer after work.
it's
There
It's a
isn't
part
that
of mental
going on.
health.
It's difficult to.
It's human nature,
replicate.
Yeah.
gossiping anyway.
course.
It's like,
Yeah.
it's part of like...
Well, that's
that
what we're
kind of-
doing here, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, that's true, actually, in a different way. Yeah.
Having a gossip
Yeah.
in front of some microphones. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that it's just a new way of working, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like a matter of adapting to the new world that we're living in, where there's a lot more people in the world. We have technology which enables a different way of working. People are wanting to live in different ways. Everything's just changing. So it's a matter of not resisting it and fighting it.
Yeah.
And
No.
just actually trying to find. And there's going to be some really interesting and really beneficial things to come out of that
Yeah.
for business and people.
But anecdotally, I think one of the groups that have benefited most from that are people who work in the technology sector, and particularly
Yes.
developers.
Yes,
because
that's
they
true.
finally get some quiet, assuming there's no small children they need to look after at home and things like this.
Have you
Significant
been on
amounts of
any Zoom
quiet
calls
time.
with your developers? I mean,
Yes.
come on. It's dogs, it's kids.
Yeah,
It's chaotic.
There's lots, but
Yeah, yeah.
people are saying, "Boy, I get to actually get a few hours without the phone going, without being
Yeah,
interrupted,
true.
without the tap on the shoulder,
Yes.
without a meeting being called,
Yeah.
to be able to concentrate on something for
Yeah.
several hours at a time,
Yeah.
which is hard to achieve in an office,
Yeah.
or an open plan office." Yeah.
I think you did well to avoid the fact that it's true that most developers don't really like the human interaction thing. Well done for
I
doing
know,
that.
I didn't
well
want
done.
to
No, that's good.
disparage.
There's
A whole
but
profession.
there's, like also just to add to the of people going out into regional areas more. I mean, I think it's an interesting kind of trend, as it's kind of regionalisation of people moving a little bit out, and then you might expect it to be more of a ruralisation after that, where Australia in particular, that has quite a bit of land that no one really lives on, and being able to distribute the resources with more population is going to be quite a meaningful way to do it. And it's actually happening already anyway, especially with technology. I can't remember the name of the business, but essentially they build robots for ag sector.
Yeah.
Essentially, cropping machinery and other automated kind of things like that, machines. And there's it's a big shed out in the middle of, I think it's out near Emerald or Roma or something like that, with 30 or plus engineers out there. I actually want to go visit those guys because it'd be and I think you could expect more of that.
So it's the man who lives in a van and goes surfing. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
But I mean, I think it kind of indicates two things. That one, I guess in agriculture, there's an increase in technology, and we're going to be relying more on technology and the development of that technology. So we're going to need more people of that profession moving out to those areas to be doing like hands-on and testing and everything.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think, with technology, it is actually going to increase the likelihood of ruralisation anyway.
So this is dependent, though, on things like NBN and 5G.
Yes.
Because if they don't have the connectivity, it doesn't matter.
It's not going to work.
Right.
The whole thing doesn't work.
No.
And you might expect that to get there within the next 10 years at least, right? Come on, say
Maybe.
Yes.
We'll see.
Yes,
We'll see.
Indeed.
Right. So I won't
that's
say
a
who
topic
said
that
that,
we'll
but
be
anyway,
revisiting.
employers have always
Yeah.
wanted flexibility, says DJ. Companies have always said they offered it, but most wouldn't take it because the company never really wanted them to.
No.
So
That's
there was
true.
a sort of political.
Yes. Well,
it's
I think it was a bit of
thinking around
marketing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like
maybe.
one of the benefits of signing on.
Yeah.
But
But
then they're
also
like-
this
yeah.
kind of the false belief that it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't until we had the pandemic that they were forced to do something, and guess what? It worked.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's one of the things about the pandemic is it pushed maybe some like kind of micro trends that were starting to emerge, pushed them 5 or 10 years down the road all
Yeah.
at once.
Yeah.
And and those things, those little micro trends were kind of confronting, I think, and presented employers with maybe a sense of loss of control or just having to do things in a different way, and now it's been shoved down their throats by the pandemic, and they find they can get by anyway for
And
the
it's
most
been a
part.
massive accelerator for innovation.
Yeah.
And
That's
McKinsey
right.
published that report that said that there'd been as much
Our friends at
digital
McKinsey.
innovation
Yeah.
in the last 10 months as there had been in the previous 6 years. So I'm trying to think what specifically were the things that happened that were digital, but it must be true because McKinsey said it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's like just
Yes.
the end of the thing there. Anyway.
So, guys, anything else we want to finish up with? So, just to say, for anyone who wasn't able to sit in for the whole of this, it's going to be recorded. It is recorded, and we're going to stick it up on the Digital Village website, so you will be able to see it there. And we will be back in a month's time, just over a month's time, in fact. I think on the 27th of March.
I think it's the 31st.
31st of
Last
March.
Wednesday of the month.
Yes,
Yeah.
and in that show, that'll be an hour-long session, and we'll be covering a broader range of subjects with a few special guests that
That's right.
we're
Yeah.
beginning to line up for that. So just remains for me to say thank you, Luke, and thank you, Jace,
Thank you,
and
Paul.
thank you to our audience. I hope it's been interesting. Please give us your feedback. And again, you can follow us on our hashtag #TheDV Show and on social media or on the other channels, and of course on our website. So thank you all very much indeed, and see you next time.
See you next time.
Thanks very much, everybody.
We out?